Hello again, everyone. I'm going to make a video here talking about anabolic androgenic steroids. Um, this video is, I guess, sort of coming off my last one where I talk about is it actually possible to turn IFBB Men's Physique Pro naturally. I'll probably throw that in the link below if anyone wants to check that one out too. But purpose of this video is to just sort of give a general kind of education of what these anabolic androgenic steroids are and how they work and their side effects, and sort of go more into detail about the physiology of it. On that last video, I was just kind of comparing myself to some other very high-level athletes that I, personally would never believe that they were natural, and it's, generally something I would never find possible to do. But I didn't really go into the physiology too much, so I'm going to try to do that more here, and hopefully, just give you an idea of if this is something you're looking at, maybe, give yourself a second thought about doing it, and, yeah, just kind of generally just talk about it. So, first thing, let's just break it down. I'm going to say AAS for short. AAS, Anabolic Androgenic Steroids. So, anabolic refers to the building of muscle. It's just building of muscle, but also more in generally, it's just creation of new cells. Specifically for anabolic androgenic steroids, though, we refer to anabolic as the creation of more muscle or protein synthesis. Androgenic is referring to also something that steroids do, is an increase in the male sexual characteristics. These can be things such as a deeper voice, larger hands, larger, just increased, bone size, increased, even size of your skull. Stuff like that is generally the common term for what androgenic means. It refers to increased male sexual characteristics. Steroids are just a class of drugs. So these steroids promote an androgenic and anabolic effect. Generally, the way steroids work is that when you go to the gym, when you exercise, what happens is you create little micro tears in the muscle, and the body has a natural repair process. And when you come back from the gym, have your meal, go to bed, generally the healing, recovery, and rebuilding process for the most part occurs while you sleep, and that has to do with the amount of testosterone that is released, which is primarily released during sleep, actually, and very much less normally throughout the day. And so yeah, I'll start with the average amount of blood testosterone that is found in the body. Excuse me, before I get on to that, I would so anabolic androgenic steroids, I said what they're what it actually means. But so what is actually anabolic androgenic steroids? It is artificial testosterone. So it is pretty much artificial male hormones. That being said, now let's move on to blood testosterone levels, comparing a natural person to somebody that is taking AAS. So in an average adult male, the typical AAS amounts in nanograms per deciliter are anywhere from about 200 to 1100 nanograms per deciliter in the average adult male. Maybe you could get a little higher with intense training, stuff like that, but generally this is the range. For a AAS user, this can get much higher. This range can increase in orders of magnitude. And this is important to note because testosterone is pretty much the main thing that is responsible for stimulating protein synthesis. So, you know, just from that, you can sort of realize why natural users are at such a disadvantage in terms of strength and appearance as compared to an AAS user. Since the AAS user has, on average, anywhere from, you know, 5 to around 12 times the amount of natural adult male testosterone, blood testosterone. So 5 to 12 times, you know, just, you know, kind of think about that, literally orders of magnitude higher. It's important to note that not all anabolic androgenic steroids affect blood testosterone. So, you know, maybe someone in the Olympia can literally have 0 blood testosterone. I think it just, it's kind of a definition thing in the way artificial testosterone works. I think some testosterones or anabolic androgenic steroids don't actually register as blood testosterone. So there's kind of a fine line with that. I'm not really sure about the details in that, but it's just something to note. Now let's just kind of talk about you know, the AAS kind of in society and their current role in, I guess, the fitness industry and the competitive industry. Anabolic androgenic steroids are pretty rampant. In you know, last 10, 15, 20 years, their increased use by recreational athletes has just gone through the roof. I mean, people, you know, as young as, you know, in their teens, guys in their teens is generally going to be guys. Guys in their teens are, you know, taking these anabolic androgenic steroids with really without doing any research, really, without knowing what's kind of the safe dosages to take, where to start, how to get off steroids. I mean, you know, these kids, they really have no idea, you know, generally what they're doing and how to properly do something like this, because it is quite a you know, a thing that can drastically affect your, you know, your lifestyle, your lifespan, your appearance, and everything along those lines. So let's just talk about just some studies. I pulled off a lot of information off studies here, so I'm just going to kind of read over some of it. So this is from the Anabolic 500 survey, characteristics of male users versus non-users of anabolic androgenic steroids for strength training. So these kind of sixes just really baffle me, because it's just ridiculous. Of 506 male self-reported AAS users, 70.4% of the AAS users were recreational exercisers, who were reported an average of 11.1 performance-enhancing agents in their routine. So, first of all, that's just kind of ridiculous. I mean, it's, you know, 70% of, you know, AAS users are just recreational exercises. Basically, probably just guys that are going to the gym looking to get bigger. You know, they're not professional athletes. They're not, you know, some kind of, you know, whatever, sponsored athletes that are, you know, trying to make it big. They're literally just recreational exercisers that I would say in general should, you know, be going nowhere near these substances. Another study I found here, also it was also a 500 study, but it was a different one. Of 500 AAS users who participated in the survey, 78.4% were non-competitive bodybuilders and non-athletes. 59.6%, or 298 of 500 of the respondents, reported using at least 1,000 milligrams of testosterone or its equivalent per week. Now, I just need you guys to kind of, you know, think about that. 1,000 1,000 milligrams of testosterone. That's a freaking gram of extra testosterone that they're injecting into their bodies per week. That is ridiculous. They're not even competitive bodybuilders, and they're non-athletes, and they're injecting at least 1,000 milligrams of testosterone. You know, you could even, you can see effects of testosterone, artificial testosterone that you inject, even from anywhere from 50 to 100 milligrams, you can see effects. So basically what I'm saying is, if you're going to start, start small, because you want to mitigate these harmful effects as much as possible. But reading here, 1,000 milligrams of testosterone a week. So clearly these guys are over-injecting, they're overusing, they don't know what they're doing, and it's just pretty much a mess, honestly. The majority, 99.2% of AAS users, self-administered injectable AAS formulations, and up to 13% report unsafe injection practices such as reusing needles, and sharing multi-dose vials. Jesus Christ. In addition to using AAS, 25% of users admitted to the adjuvant use of growth hormone insulin for an anabolic effect, and 99.2% of our users reported subjective side effects from AAS use. So this whole entire statement that I just pretty much read just summarizes the fact that these people really, are overusing these things. They're over-abusing steroids, or anabolic androgenic steroids, and they're really not doing it in any correct ways or manners. And in terms of how rampant, this stuff actually is, and how much this abuse is actually, in the fitness industry, here are some interesting tables I found. And apologies for not actually having the sites, or the studies, down here. I honestly I was researching through my database, and I was just kind of literally just cutting and pasting and plotting off a bunch of things. So my information is kind of all scrambled around, but this is a pretty interesting table I found here. All they did was search terms and look at how many sites were available for each one of these terms. So it's pretty insane. 300,000 steroids for sale. Buy steroids online, 266,000. Synthol, 310,000. It's pretty ridiculous. And here again shows where they actually get these illicit substances from. Internet dealers, I think this one was the 500 study, yeah. Internet dealers, 70%. Gym member dealer, 500%. Foreign mail order, 18%. 24%. Physician, 11%. Internet pharmacy, 8.6%. I would say out of all these sources, obviously the safest one is the physician. I am guessing most competitive bodybuilders, or professional bodybuilders, guys that are in the Olympia, they're most likely getting their steroids from physicians, and being given a lot of recommendations and support as to how they do their cycling and stuff like that, because being a bodybuilder, honestly, you can just come up to your doctor, say, I'm taking steroids. I am not going to say, the physician can't be like, oh, stop taking steroids. They'll say that, but, they're obviously, if, they're a professional bodybuilder, they're not going to stop taking steroids, that's, not a thing. So the physicians, their next, line of approach is to help them as best they can. So generally what they'll do is they'll prescribe them the anabolic androgenic steroids, and they'll give them kind of a breakdown of how to use it. The physician or the coach, these coaches that coach these pro bodybuilders, they're not as much coaches as they are chemists, really, honestly, because sure, they tell them how much to eat and how many calories and stuff like that, but really their main purpose is to tell them what to take in terms of drugs. That's the main thing. So I'll move on now to the side effects. So this is again from the Anabolic Androgenic Steroids, a survey of 500 users studied. Nearly 100% of the sample reported subjective side effects with AAS use. 70% experienced 3 or more adverse symptoms. The common subjective side effects are acne, testicular shrinkage, insomnia, sexual dysfunction, injection of pain site, striae, fluid retention, mood alterations, and gynecomastia. 5 of the 9 most common side effects were experienced by more than 50% of survey participants, with acne and testicular atrophy being reported in nearly 2/3 of users. So basically what this is saying is that there's a lot of negative effects, and for the most part, nearly 100%, so literally all pretty much users experience some sort of side effects, some sort of debilitating side effects. The way I kind of think about steroids is that they are kind of like a loan. The kind of analogy I use is it's kind of like a loan from a bank. That's really what it is. So, you know, just like you take money from a bank, you have to pay them back later. Steroids really work the same way. You inject, you know, you take these, you know, this extraneous source of testosterone and place it in your body, and after you're done using it, suddenly, you know, you suffer, and you can never really get back to the baseline you were at before you started taking, before you start taking and using these substances. So yeah, like I said, anabolic androgenic steroids. It is a it's testosterone. So what happens is, you know, your testosterone skyrockets. With that, your estrogen also shoots up. And the thing about the body is the body likes to be as efficient as possible. The body likes to use, in all of its metabolic processes, it likes to use as least amount of energy as possible. So when the body detects that there's an extraneous source of testosterone coming into the blood and into the body, it'll shut down the system of how it naturally makes testosterone, which for you know, a male is the testes, the testicles, the balls. It shuts down the process, and this is known as hypogonadism. So it's the decrease in function of sexual organs. And again, this is primarily concerned for males. And so here is and as I previously read in the symptoms, one common thing that happens is testicular shrinkage. So here's a chart I have here that actually shows testes size in relation to accumulated duration of anabolic androgen steroid abuse in weeks. Oh, look at this, 1,024 weeks. Wow, that's crazy. Testes size, they put it in milliliters. I don't know why they just couldn't have wrote cubic centimeters. I think that would be a little more of an understandable whatchamacallit, you know, figure. But milliliters, cubic centimeters, same way to look at it, same thing. So as you can see, you started around 21, anywhere from 21 to 23. Looks like you started about right around 22. And as you can see, just with 16 weeks of use, so 4 months of use, you know, it drops pretty drastically. You know, you go from 22 all the way down to about 17. That's already a big decrease. And, you know, with continued use, you know, cycling over years, that just decreases all the way down to about here. So you get down to about, I don't know, I would say like around 11, 12. So, you know, you almost, you know, your testes shrink by about half. So, you know, I don't know, how do you, you know, picturing, you know, a 22 cubic centimeters, you know, maybe it's around base of your thumb. From the base of your thumb all the way to your thumb. maybe around that size, coming all the way down to probably what would be, you know, this part of your pinky, like right here. So it's, you know, it's pretty insane as to what happens to the testes once taking anabolic androgenic steroids. I can just leave this here if you guys want to ponder at it. But yeah, so that's, I mean, that's only one of many side effects. Let's see, I have here, long-term use of AAS can eventually have impact on some of the brain pathways and chemicals, such as dopamine, serotonin, and opioid systems that are affected by other drugs of abuse. Considering the combined effects of their complex, direct, and indirect actions, it is not surprising that AAS can affect mood and behavior in significant ways. So, again, hormones in the human body, doesn't matter really which hormones, but all hormones pretty much affect almost everything. And that's why, you hear, the term roid rage. And, it's from, unsurprisingly, it's from anabolic androgenic steroids, because they do affect brain pathways and they alter these chemicals in the brain. So that's what really ends up happening. Another symptom I found here. So one of the main kind of concerns as a anabolic androgenic steroid user is the heart. And after use of AAS, you see an enlarged heart size. So this study I found here, comparison of right ventricle systolic function between long-term anabolic androgenic steroid user and non-user bodybuilding athletes. A study of two-dimensional speckle tracking echocardiography. Intraventricular septal thickness, left ventricle posterior wall thickness, relative wall thickness, and left ventricle mass index were significantly higher in AAS users than non-users. The prolonged misuse and abuse of AAS can result in several cardiac adverse effects, some which may be even fatal, such as cardiac death, myocardial infarction, heart attack, and stroke. Some authors have shown that chronic use of AAS is related to left ventricular diastolic dysfunction and subclinical systolic dysfunction, defined as reduced systolic strain with normal left ventricle ejection fraction. In addition, there are several case reports of congestive heart failure with reduced ejection fraction in AAS user bodybuilders. Excuse me. So, anabolic androgenic steroids do significantly have a detrimental effect on the heart muscle itself. Because again, the protein synthesis occurs pretty much everywhere, including the heart. It's also interesting to note that with the rapid increase in muscle mass, it's been found that it's hard even for the connective tissue to keep up with this rapid growth in muscle. And you'll see things like ruptured tendons and torn ligaments, even like torn muscles, pretty all around in many steroid athletes. And this literally is because the connective tissue can't keep up with this rampant use of steroids, and it can't keep up with the growth. And so here was a study I found: ruptured tendons in anabolic androgenic steroid users. Surgical records were obtained for most participants. Results: 22% of AAS users, but only 6% of non-users reported at least one lifetime tendon rupture. I don't remember what the actual pool size of participants was for this study, but I mean the results show 22% of AAS users reported one tendon rupture, at least one, but only 6% of non-users reported at least one. That's also pretty significant. Another thing to I guess keep in mind is that these anabolic steroids, they not only have temporary effects, specifically while you're on your cycle, but they actually also have a lot of permanent effects. Let's see what I have here. I have something from the Journal of Physiology. Brief exposure to anabolic steroids may have long-lasting, possibly permanent, performance-enhancing effects, shown by a study published in Journal of Physiology. So I think there's definitely some controversy going on right now as to, I think, what the Olympics are doing about. I don't remember exactly the story, but it's either banning Olympic weightlifting or permanently banning the athletes who are found to take these banned substances, because it's found that they actually do have permanent effects in the anatomy and physiology. Previously, reacquisition of muscle mass with or without steroid use after previous inactivity has been attributed to motor learning. However, new data from the University of Oslo suggests that there is a cellular memory mechanism within muscle of brief steroid users. The team investigated the effects of steroids on muscle reacquisition in mice and discovered greater muscle mass and more myonuclei, which are essential components in the muscle fiber function, were apparent after returning to exercise. Mice were briefly exposed to steroids, which resulted in increased muscle mass and number of cell nuclei in the muscle fibers. 3 months after withdrawal of the drug, their muscles grew by 30% over 6 days following an exercise. The untreated mice grew insignificantly. Interesting. Findings may have consequences for the exclusion of time of doping offenders, as brief exposure to anabolic steroids might have long-lasting performance-enhancing effects. So again, kind of like I mentioned, it can, there's definitely a good amount of research that shows that it has permanent effects. So that's also something quite interesting. Let's see. I have something up here. Paganis and colleagues, 2006, have shown in a study of 160 anabolic androgenic steroid abusing athletes compared with 160 placebo and controls that the wide range of psychiatric side effects induced by the abuse of anabolic androgenic steroids is correlated to the severity of abuse. The force of these side effects intensifies as abuse escalates. So this is kind of what I mentioned earlier, where, as little as possible is as best as possible, because you want to mitigate the effects of these substances, at least the deleterious effects, as much as you can. And so again, this is why going back to all these guys that are amateur athletes, not even competitors, that are taking these massive amounts of steroids. It's just really, a pretty, dumb idea to go about it. I guess the final thing that I'll kind of note before I end this video, I think we've been going for a little bit now, is that even after you go off these steroids, this is kind of going back to the analogy I had of taking a loan from the bank. Once you go off these steroids, I mean, you're left at a pretty bad position, because what happens is, now once you decide, oh, my cycle is done, oh, I need to get back to normal, the side effects are getting too great, whatever the reason is, my prep's about to start, I can't be on steroids now, I don't honestly know. Whatever the reason is, what happens is, now you pull these steroids out of your system, these extraneous testosterone. However, as previously mentioned, with the hypogonadism, now you don't have a way of producing your natural testosterone, because your body still thinks, oh, I'm going to get my 1,000 milligrams this week, I'll be just fine, I don't need the testes to do any work. But your body doesn't know that, It doesn't know that suddenly you cut it out. And so generally what ends up happening is this very kind of drastic thing known as the rebound effect. So what happens is, you pull all the testosterone out, now you're left with pretty much nothing. And so what happens is, generally, after removing the testosterone, you will have pretty quick and pretty severe muscular atrophy. Um, your estrogen will still be sky high, and your cortisol will still be sky high, which is a catabolic steroid, and it actually promotes the breakdown of muscle. Um, Holding that much muscle mass at that level of testosterone, it's not natural for the body. And so once you lose all the testosterone, your body, as I mentioned earlier, wants to be as efficient as possible. Why does the body need to hold all this muscle, especially when it doesn't have all this testosterone to support it and continue supporting the growth? So the body will immediately start breaking down testosterone, and you see this everywhere. I mean, you see this in athletes, in pro bodybuilders that get injured. You see this in bodybuilders that retire. You can, almost immediately, within days to weeks, definitely by months, even 1 month, they will lose a significant amount of muscle mass. So this isn't the kind of, steroids aren't the kind of thing where you can just, do like one little cycle and then everything will be okay. You can't just say, oh, I'll just take one cycle, get huge, and then I'll be good for, however long. Doesn't really work that way. What will happen is muscle will atrophy. Really easy example to look at is two of the, top bodybuilders of the last, decade. We got Jay Cutler and Ronnie Coleman. Look at them when they were competing and look at them now. Um, Someone like Ronnie Coleman, I mean, obviously he retired, but he had the injury. So people may argue that, oh, he was obviously sedentary. Natural people lose muscle too when they're sedentary, when they're, bound in a hospital bed. But, it's, it doesn't really matter. You're still, once you get off the steroids, even if you're still up and active, you're going to lose muscle. Look at Jay Cutler, for instance. Jay Cutler, I mean, used to weigh, I don't know what he competed in, like, his high 200 pounds. I mean, he's still got muscle, but he doesn't look anywhere close at all to what he used to look like just, a few years ago, or I don't know when he retired. But, just in that simple time of, 3 or 4 years, I mean, obviously, I doubt he's, taking anything anymore. But just in that little time frame, a lot of what he worked for is gone. Same thing if you look at someone like Ronnie Coleman. I mean, the guy also, completely pretty much lost a very high amount of his muscle, over 50%. And then you get someone like Dennis Wolf, who had that pretty nasty back injury. I think his back, he had little shards of bone that were broken in his back, so he had to get a pretty big back surgery. And he too, you can tell. I mean, all he does on his Instagram now is posts throwbacks, and you can see in the few posts he does make of him currently, or of him when he was, still, coming off of the injury. He lost a lot of weight, and I mean a lot of weight. So those are, just things to consider. It's known as the rebound effect, or I believe it's also called the cortisol rebound effect. And there's ways to kind of come off steroids in a systematic way, in a way that you're supposed to. I forgot the actual term for it, but you could even, I don't know, go through something like testosterone replacement therapy. So, messing with hormones is it's a very serious thing, and all these, 17, 18, 19-year-old guys that, do it, really just have no idea of what physiologically takes place, and what they're really doing to their bodies. And obviously, it's without question that bodybuilding with these substances, it's not a healthy sport. Obviously, a um, it's not a sport that'll promote your health, promote longevity. If anything, it's quite debilitating. Actually, it'll probably shorten lifespan. It'll do these effects that you definitely don't want happening. And there's just you just hear these stories really all the time, of bodybuilders dying from things. Generally, it's not steroids though. It's more of stuff like insulin and diuretics that can more drastically cause death. That's not for this video. I'm not going to talk about insulin diuretics here. But insulin diuretics do play a major role in bodybuilding, and are also pretty heavily involved in the way bodybuilders stack the substances they use. And you see quite a number of deaths in bodybuilders. So I think that's all I got for this one. If you're some young amateur kid who is just looking to to try this stuff out to make some gains, first of all, I would say don't do it. But second of all, if you are gonna do it, if I can't convince you otherwise, or if you can't convince yourself otherwise, I would say at least try to reach your natural genetic max before you start taking these substances. So I would say at least get to about 5 or 6 years in training. If anything more. I'm at 8 years at this point for me in my career. Right now at this point I'm probably gaining less than a quarter pound of muscle a month. So for someone like me, this would be a pretty appropriate time for me to take these substances, but I personally choose not to. But I'm just saying, if if this is something you're looking at, definitely try to reach your genetic max and genetic potential before you have to go to the next step. And do your research, because this video really only skims the surface of all this science. So that's all I have. Thanks guys for watching. If you haven't checked out my last video on if you can turn IFBB men's physique pro naturally, check that one out too. I compare myself to some other pretty high-end athletes, and show what really is possible naturally, and give a realistic perspective on what I personally think of the NPC, and getting into the IFBB, being a natural competitor. Alright, that's all I got. Thanks guys for watching. Till next time.